All right. So we have a treat for you today because Ashley Gundlach is the president of British Swim School. And I think it's going to be a real treat to have a conversation with her about what it is like to be the leader of an organization that is comprised of a bunch of business owners. Ashley, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
It's good to see you. It's been a while. So, why don't you start by just telling everybody a bit about your role, a bit about British Swim School, and what a day in the life of the president looks like?
Sure. So I'll start with what British Swim School is. So we are a franchise organization that teaches kids and really non-swimmers of any age how to swim. And so we start with water survival, which sets us apart a little bit than if you're, maybe just going to a city pool where you start off with all of the strokes. And so our goal is to teach kids how to enjoy the water, not be fearful of it. And then as our first priority to really save themselves if they were to get into a water accident, or at least buy those, critical few seconds to call for help.
Mhm.
Because a lot of times it really is just a matter of seconds. Our model is unique because we operate out of facilities that typically have water that sits empty most of the day. So hotels, fitness centers, retirement centers. So that allows our franchisees to have pools in a lot of different locations. It's a lower cost of entry. We're not building $1 million facilities. So as I mentioned, we're a franchise brand. So we are comprised of about 170 owners across the US and Canada. So each of our owners are buying a territory. So it's a protected set of zip codes or postal codes where they're able to operate in.
Mhm.
So as the leader of the brand, I have a few different hats that I wear. The first is really finding qualified people to join our franchise system. And so we have a really structured process to get them familiar with British Swim School, learn kind of the good, the bad, the ugly. We want them to have a really realistic expectation of what it's going to be like to build a swim school. So a good portion of any of my day is going to be working with our development team who is talking to these potential franchise owners for British Swim School. So giving them information, helping them answer questions, meeting with the candidates. But the bulk of my day and the bulk of every week is really actively supporting our existing owners.
Mhm.
We have a team of about 22 individuals on British Swim School that work on our brand team. So roughly structured across our aquatics team, our operations team, and our marketing teams that
Mhm.
are supporting these owners. So a given day is probably, checking in with a few of the leaders from my team who are working on various priorities or, probably unique support questions or situations with franchisees. But a lot of conversations on a daily basis with franchisees, whether it's opportunities for them to expand, a problem that they're trying to work through, or facilitating some of the little groups that we have. So we have like a franchise advisory council that we meet with
Mhm.
periodically. So meeting with that team. And then the rest of my time is really probably just doing a lot of analysis on the brand and how we're doing for enrollments of new customers, how our newest franchisees are ramping up, how our biggest franchisees are growing year over year. And then based on what I see, it's just digging into a lot of different reports and analysis to see where we have the opportunities to move some levers and really support our franchisees.
Yeah, I can imagine that that analysis is really important. I'm a big fan of the 80-20 rule and really understanding what is the 20% that drives 80%. And I believe the Pareto principle shows up everywhere. So I'm sure you've got 20% of your franchisees are probably driving 80% of the results for the brand. And so understanding what they're doing differently is important because that's how you can actually help all of the other franchise owners to rise up and do as well as your top 20%.
Yeah, absolutely. And as that group continues to grow and to scale their businesses, it's also requiring us to grow and scale our processes. And
Hmm.
so, you know, obviously everybody suffered in some way, shape, or form during COVID, but we had to completely shut down. And so it was a building back up of the business. And so we're seeing over the last 2 years franchise owners that are reaching levels that the brand had never seen before. And so with that comes really large teams and a scale of a business that the brand never had to support before. And so we're working through, quite a few different ways of how do we support them as the owners and give them the tools that they then need to support their teams with the
Hmm.
assumption that all of the time and the energy and the investment that we're putting into those processes and that support is going to build kind of the runway for all of the franchisees who are going to grow after
Hmm.
them.
Hmm. Yeah, super, super important. I used to own a TELUS dealership, and a dealer model is different from a franchise model. And I'm amazed at the lack of interactions there were at the executive level for the actual dealer for TELUS, really. I mean, and I came from TELUS. I worked for TELUS corporate, so I knew a lot of these people. But I was amazed at how uninvolved they were and how I'm going to say tone deaf they were at times.
Mm.
So I remember there was a time when we sold prepaid phone cards. It was, a thing that I mean, I think you can still buy prepaid phones. I don't know if you still come in and buy cards, but people would come
No,
into our location and they would buy these prepaid phone cards. And TELUS got the bright idea to drop the commission, the comp rate on the prepaid phone cards. And I used to work for TELUS corporate and I used to manage the retail side of the business. And when they did this, I lost my mind because I looked at what we would get paid to actually service someone who came in to get a prepaid phone card. And the amount of money that we would get paid to do it didn't even cover what the minimum wage would be for the
mm,
15 minutes that it took somebody to take care of that client. And I remember raising it to my VP at the time and doing the math for him and saying, like, this is ludicrous. Like, why would you do this? And I ended up I stopped selling cards. We don't sell them here
mm.
anymore.
Wow.
It was like, I'm not doing it. I'm not selling them because the compensation was so bad. So, anyways, I say that because I think when executives lose touch with their operators, whether it's a dealer model or a franchise model, you can get into kind of a dangerous situation. And I recognize, I mean, one of the questions I want to ask you is what's it like managing owners? Because everyone who owns a franchise, a dealership, a small business is entrepreneurial. And there's often a lot of egos that come along with running your own business and people that have very strong opinions around how things should be done. And what is that like for you? Like, how do you create? Because it's like you're not their boss, so it's a different relationship. And so, how do you approach managing the relationship with your franchise owners to create a positive culture, to positively influence them, and to get the collaboration and do the analysis that you want for the greater good of all franchisees?
Yeah, I mean, when you have a group of, 150 plus entrepreneurial personalities, you're going to have every kind of personality, just like you have with any group, but I think it is magnified. And that's why we love the franchisees because they are people who wanted to go into business for themselves, but with the support of a franchise system. And
Mhm.
it's such a unique relationship because I came from a marketing agency. I was there for a long time. And really at any given point, both sides of that equation, whether it's the agency or the client, have the opportunity to walk away. You might have
Mhm.
60-day out or something like that. But in franchising, we're entering a 10-year partnership with these people.
You're
And so,
getting married.
well, absolutely. And so, it's hard to get out of that if you want to. So, you're entering into it really sure that you're committed to this person or to this partnership, however they have their business structured for a long time. And to add an interesting kind of caveat to that relationship is a lot of our franchisees are like a husband and wife or two, partners.
Mm-hmm.
And so not only are you working with your interaction with them, but then you also have the dynamic of
Uh-huh.
that partnership. And so,
And that can be challenging. I've dealt with that in our business, working with couples, and that can be its own beast of a problem.
absolutely. I always say that it's very telling how they sit and orient themselves for a Zoom call, because when they're like shoulder to shoulder or both on their own screens, you're like, okay, so that's maybe how they view their partnership. But if you have one person behind the other, maybe it's a smaller room, but a lot of times it's kind of telling how they set themselves up. So I always like when I get on a Zoom call and they're like shoulder to shoulder, I'm like, all right,
Yeah.
we've got this. Um, but we operate really by the book of franchising law, and there's a lot of legalese that goes into what we can and we can't do and say, and how we can support our franchisees. And so with that as kind of our undercurrent, we maintain a lot of transparency with our franchisees that I don't think all franchise organizations do, because I think we're of the mindset that we have nothing to hide, because we
Mm-hmm.
are, excuse me, we are really just doing things ethically, and we're doing things in the best interest of our franchisees. But also, if we are able to kind of open the curtain a little bit and let them see, here's what we want to do, here's where our limitations are, whether it is a legal limitation or whether it's just a structural, or we have these other 10 priorities that we've committed to.
Mm-hmm.
So we understand this is important, but something will have to give if we're going to move that up. We feel that it at least allows them to understand the why behind the decision. And they might not always agree with it. And just like any partnership, you always have people who disagree with what you're going to do. 170 people, no one's going to like
Yeah.
everything.
It's hard to get
Um,
consensus with 10, let alone 170.
exactly. But, if our goal is, okay, we are always here to help our franchisees, because at the end of the day, we are not successful unless they are successful. And the more that I kind of remind them of that and make them the mantra, like, we aren't going to be successful unless you have a strong business, unless you have recurring customers who love coming to the pool, unless you're able to market efficiently, all of these things. So with that in mind, here's what we are able to do. And so we talk a lot about, our goal is always to get to yes. The end goal of yes might not look the same as what you want it to be and what I want it to be, but let's continue to have these conversations until we can find something that does work for
Mm-hmm.
everybody. And so, you talked a little bit about the data. And so we try to, have benchmarks for people at different stages of their business. And so, the benchmark for a year one or year two owner is going to look really different than the benchmarks for somebody who's, in year 9, 10, 11.
Mm-hmm.
And so trying to help them to see kind of what our idea of success is, and understand, does that match their idea of success? And if it doesn't, okay, how do we bridge that gap as well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can imagine that is challenging. So most of the guests that I have had on the show, not all, are entrepreneurs themselves. And most of the people who listen to the show, aside from my mom, hi mom, if you're listening, are entrepreneurs. And so I would love it if you could talk to them about what is it like to own a franchise? And the reason I'm asking you this question is because many, many, many years ago, when I worked for TELUS, actually, when I worked for ClearNet before it was acquired by TELUS in Canada. And when it was acquired by TELUS in Canada, I had stock options. And so I made a bit of money. And I explored buying a franchise at the time. And I was looking into the travel industry. Cruise
Mhm.
Ship Centers, I think, is the franchise that I was looking at the time. And I sat down with an accountant who was kind of like a business advisor type guy. And he told me at that time that based on my experience and the way that I knew how to do things from my corporate job, that I would probably not like being a franchise owner because there were too many rules. And so, what I know about British Swim School is there are rules and there are also shades of gray, or there's flexibility within the rules in terms of
Mhm.
how each of your owners operate. I've been lucky enough to get to know some of your owners, and I see some of the diversity in the way that they operate their business. So I would love if you would talk to our listeners a little bit about what's it like to own this type of a franchise. If they were considering buying a franchise, like what should they expect? Because I think the story I've told myself is an outdated story in terms
Mhm.
of, that I remember somebody saying, if you own a pizza, you can only buy the Coke from them. It's got to have the gold lid on it. And if you buy it from anybody else and they come in and they audit your store, you're going to lose your store. Like there were so many rules, and it felt very limiting, but that's not the
Mhm.
vibe that I get from British Swim School. So can you share a little bit about what people should be, what people should know if they're considering a franchise, your take on it?
Sure, sure. So one thing that's really great, I mentioned the legal side of franchising, and so we operate in the United States and Canada, and there are so many differences between the legal
Hmm.
side of both. Probably enough differences just to be dangerous. So you have to,
Uh-huh.
in our role, we have to, educate. It's kind of like Italian and Spanish. It's like they're similar enough, but they're different enough that you
Hmm.
have to be smart about it.
I get that because I own a company in Canada and in the United States, and it's so different, so very different.
But any good franchise brand is going to follow a really diligent process to educate a potential franchise owner about their brand. And so that process is really a risk-free process. And until you get to the final stages of, maybe seeing if you qualify for loans or things like that. But it's really a risk-free process for anybody who's interested in exploring franchise brands. And through that process, you get a sense of what it's going to be like to be a franchisee of that brand. You're going to get exposed to the operations of the business, whatever the core service operating um, side of the business is. So for us, that would be the aquatics and our curriculum and marketing. And throughout that process, you're going to get to meet key players of that brand's team. And so I think my first kind of warning sign would be if that doesn't feel like a really buttoned up process, that's probably a sign that, once you get into the franchise brand of what's to come. And so,
Hmm.
if you can't get that front, this is your best impression, like if you can't get your foyer to look
Yeah.
good, the rest of your house isn't probably going to look good as
Yeah.
well. And so it's an opportunity for people to really understand what are those guardrails for the business? And so we talk a lot about guardrails with British Swim School. And so, there's going to be non-negotiables in any brand. And so for British Swim School, it's the curriculum. It's the way that we're teaching kids how to swim, and adults and teenagers and everybody in between. Um, but that's been developed and that's been honed in on for almost 40 years or almost 45 years, excuse me, for our brand. And so we don't want somebody coming in who says, oh, well, I've been teaching for the YMCA for 20 years. And I think the way that they do it is better, because that's not going to be the British Swim School model. And so,
Right.
our goal is that if somebody is in South Florida or somebody is in San Francisco or Toronto and they go to a swim class for British Swim School, it feels like the same school. Just like if you go to a Chick-fil-A, across the United
Hmm.
States, it's the same experience, it's the same menu. But outside of that, and especially as somebody kind of shows success and they show that they're able to acquire and maintain their customers, that's when those guardrails start to kind of widen and we give people more control. As it relates to the marketing, we have all of our owners do local marketing because getting a face known in the community is really important. But we probably have 50 different ideas that we share with people about local marketing and really emphasize that, some people are really comfortable going into preschools and interacting with a class of preschools and talking about water safety. Some people might prefer to, go to a trunk or treat event and talk to parents. There's a lot of different opportunities based on where your comfort level is. And then we also find that there's franchisees that come with different backgrounds that allow them to be perhaps more entrepreneurial in terms of, let's say, marketing or some of the processes of giving feedback loops with their instructors. And so we try as much as we can to allow our franchisees to tap into their entrepreneurial spirit within those guardrails again. But then I think, any good franchise brand is going to have some type of a feedback loop or a suggestion loop with their system, because the best ideas for enhancing your brand are going to come from the people who are delivering your service or your product every day. And so, if somebody has a good idea that is going to benefit the rest of the system, we're willing to kind of take that, pilot it with the group of franchisees for a while, and then roll that out as well.
So as long as there's a proof of concept and it's within the franchise laws, then there's a willingness to entertain those entrepreneurial ideas. It's not so structured and rigid.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think one caveat of all of that is, when I have new owners come through our training, one of my pieces of advice to them is perfect the model first before you look to make changes, because you might think something could be done in a better way, but we really want you to understand why it is that we are doing it. And if you have shown us, okay, I understand why I'm doing this, but I still have these questions, then it's time for us to have a conversation. So I think you'll find that in most franchises, I would expect.
Yeah. Even when I worked in corporate, and even today, when I teach people how to sell, for example, I want them to develop the skill in its purest form. And then once you have the skill mastered, if you want to make changes because you've demonstrated that you have the competence and you can get the results, if you want to flex and get better results, then do it. But when you're starting from ground zero and you know nothing, you need to perfect the system the way the system is intended. That makes a lot of sense. So talk to me about who, like, over the years, I'm sure you've seen some profiles of people that make really, really great franchise owners. And I'm sure you've seen some profiles of people that are not really the best fit for being in the franchise system. Can you describe for me maybe, what are 2 or 3 things that might be a sign that somebody would be a good fit, and maybe 2 or 3 things that would be a sign that you might not like working in a franchise system?
Sure. I think it's probably not, in terms of what we're looking for, it's probably not entirely different than what makes a good entrepreneur. I think one of the first things is just an ability to connect with other people, because, these are the bodies and the faces that we're expecting to go out and represent us. And so, you need to be somebody who can be empathetic to employees and really inspire them to deliver your culture down to, the sharpest end of the stick, which is the customer. And so, when we're doing what we call our discovery process, where people are learning about our brand, if we're not able to have, relatively easy conversations with people, and we feel that they're, maybe combative or reclusive or something like that, probably not going to be a fantastic franchise owner. I think it has to be somebody who has a genuine kind of curiosity about learning and continuous improvement, and the ability to take feedback and take advice from someone else. And so there has to be that openness to learning more and to understanding that, you may have run other successful businesses, and we want to tap into all of those skills, but you probably haven't run, in our instance, a swim school franchise. And so, we want you to benefit from the collective experience of our owners and the brand team running it to save you time and to help you get to, profitability and beyond as fast as we can. And so, knowing that it's somebody who has that open-mindedness is something we're looking for. And then I think there's also just kind of a grit and resiliency that comes with being an entrepreneur and being a business owner. We had all of our franchise owners opened back up after COVID. We didn't have anybody who decided this business is just going away. And while that is the extreme example, there's always going to be something in any small business that is a hindrance that you have to decide, okay, here's this, I had 2 employees fall sick today and I don't have anybody to cover this shift, or the heater at the pool that I'm operating in went out and now I have to divert all of these customers to another pool, right? That's going to happen in varying forms in any business. And so, having a personality that we can see, all right, I see this issue ahead of me. Here's the path around it. Or I've got this franchise business coach and brand team. I'm going to give them a call, get them to help me, instead of just freezing and thinking, oh, this is the worst day ever. Because that's going to happen. I mean, that's just life. I think on the flip side, someone that we think wouldn't be a good owner, kind of outside of what I've said, if we have people and talk about this discovery process, it all culminates in what we have is like a meet the team day. So they're either virtual for a day full of meetings, or they're on site here at our office. And so we're meeting with them and we're answering questions and we're presenting things about the brand. And if there's someone who is going to question the why behind every single piece of what we do, it's probably a sign of what that relationship is going to be down the road. And it's a double-edged sword, because we don't want people who are just going to blindly go along with everything and aren't going to question why we do things. So there is a balance there. So it's great when people want to understand, oh, how do you do this? Or, have you ever thought about that? That shows that they're curious people and that they're always looking to improve. But if they're getting somewhat combative about the way that we're teaching swim lessons, we're like, well, maybe this isn't going to work out.
Yeah, maybe you should start your own franchise.
Yeah, absolutely. Go on
If you
your
think
own.
you could do it better than us,
Yeah.
maybe you should do that. I get that. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Being curious and wanting to understand why on some things makes sense, but also having I guess, the judgment to discern why on your own is another thing that is important. I like what you said about people being resilient when things go wrong, because isn't that so true in all businesses? Things go wrong every day. And, we have to decide when things go wrong, is this a 1 out of 10 or is it a 10 out of 10? And sometimes I think business owners have the tendency to treat 1s out of 10s like 10 out of 10s. And when everything is a 10 out of 10, you will run yourself into the ground pretty darn fast, because, you should expect things to go wrong in your business, because they do, and they will continue to do so. You're dealing with people. And so people are people. And sometimes when things go wrong, even when it's not your fault, it's now your fault. So I think that's an important attribute for everyone. So talk to me a little bit about, the pros and cons of owning a franchise. What are some of the, benefits of owning a franchise, and maybe what are some of the downsides, if any, of owning a franchise from your perspective?
Sure. I mean, hopefully we've covered quite a few of the benefits, but you're not creating the wheel from scratch, right? So I think the most understood benefit of owning a franchise really is that you're basically buying a business model that's been proven and it's been perfected and fine-tuned. You're also buying a support team
Mhm.
to, act as your mentors, act as your, in our case, we have a really deep bench of great marketing professionals. And so, they almost have like an in-house marketing agency. We have people who are, a phone call away if they want to make the most efficient schedule that they need to, or are wondering how to transition, from one pool to the other. They're not having to think about that before. They can call their coach and say, okay, well, I've worked with 10 franchisees in the last month who've done the same thing. Here's the best way to do that right now. Or if they
Mhm.
have again, in our case, let's say it's a student with a special need in the pool, they can talk to our aquatics team who's going to help them, with some modifications to our
Mhm.
program that can help them. Um, so having that, and then I'd say the other piece that probably not a lot of potential franchise owners think about is really just the peer group that you have as well. And
Mhm.
so it's not just the peers in your immediate market that, are kind of surrounding you and helping with that brand awareness, but it's across the country. And so you're not in it alone. You have, however big that franchise system is, and if it's set up well, they have opportunities for you to collaborate with each other and, maybe pose a question. We had a great example recently. We had an owner in Texas where they had some recent snowstorms and they're not used to that. They said, hey, we have some bad weather coming. I know there's some cold weather people on this chat. What do you guys do and how do you decide when to cancel classes? And lo and behold, the people from Canada immediately piped in and they're like, we wait until the school system makes a call to cancel school. And then that's when we decide to handle classes. But if you were a single swim school owner, no franchise in Texas,
Mhm.
you're just figuring that out for yourself, right?
Yeah.
And you're making that call for sure.
Yeah. I think it's an important one of the distinctions that I think is really valuable and important is you are investing in a system that is already proven.
Mhm.
And I don't know that people appreciate or understand how long it takes to develop your own policies, procedures, processes when you're starting a business.
Mhm.
It's not easy. It doesn't happen overnight. In some cases, it takes people years to perfect their own systems. And so if you think about it, when you invest in a brand that you believe in and they already have the systems and structures ready for you, you should
Mhm.
be able to exit the gate running faster than if you're trying to create all of that yourself.
Absolutely. And hopefully for, less cost in a lot of
Hmm.
ways because you're benefiting from, the buying power and the technology that is spread across so many different owners and
Hmm.
we're able to get better rates. You asked about the downsides of franchising, and I think it's kind of the flip of the coin of a lot of the things that we talked about. So, as great as it is that they're buying into a proven curriculum and proven processes, it means that they can't just go off and change everything if they want
Right.
to. If they want to add a different swim level or a different type of class or something like that, there is an opportunity to do things like that. We have added, for example, a young adult level because of franchisees saying we really need to, target teens and tweens a little bit differently. But it wasn't something we were able to just do overnight, right? So
Hmm.
things move a little bit slower on some of those processes because we don't want to recommend something at such a large scale if we haven't really proven out the economics and the processes that need to happen to do it. Because
Hmm.
much as, you know, some franchisees might be really nimble and able to create great processes, there's others where that isn't their strength. Maybe their strength is on marketing or in the pool or something. And so we have to make sure that we're really, maximizing the opportunity for everybody. And I understand that that can be frustrating
Yeah.
sometimes, right? I think, the other side of it is what I talked about, all of the legal side of things. And if somebody does, want to expand, we work with them to help them expand, assuming we've got the space available. But there are, they have to sign a new agreement and some of the things that protect both sides, which
Hmm.
I understand, if you're an entrepreneurial personality, you're like, I just want to move today. And
Exactly.
so we try to move as quickly as we can, but sometimes there are some things that make it a little bit slower.
Yeah. So talk to me a little bit about the numbers. Um, because of some of the interactions that I've had with your franchise owners, I know that um, there's an ability for franchise owners to really influence how successful their franchises are. So, what are some of the best practices that you see out there that allow people to maximize or optimize profitability when they're in a franchise system?
Sure. So I think, when we have new owners come on board, there's a mindset that we want to get in front of with them as quickly as we can. And the idea of you have to invest in the early days to growing your business and setting up that foundation. And that might not mean that you're profitable 60 days in. You're probably not going to be, but you have to set up your team and, in our case, your pools and your capacity, so that 2 years down the road, 6 months down the road, 12 months down the road, you've set yourself up for that growth, right? And
Mhm.
so it does require a little bit of a ability to take on some risk with new owners. Now, we've built this all into our initial financial investment that we tell people they're going to have, and we have, a lot of sample budgets for them. But you know that might mean that they have to build a team that's a little bit larger than they need in those early days, so that when the marketing gets turned on and all of those, marketing activities start aligning and the customers come in, they're not turning people away because they haven't trained their instructors.
Right.
It might mean, adding another pool location. Now, again, we're not building pools, but there are costs associated with renting space or something before you have the customers to fill it up. Because if a parent wants to get their kid into the pool to start swimming and they hit a wait list, they're not going to be patient and wait for 3 months. That's
Right.
true with so many different businesses. I'm getting something done in my house, and if somebody told me I don't have the staff or the people to do it for 4 months, I'd be like, okay, well, I'm going to find somebody who can do it next month, because that's the
Exactly.
so having the business kind of prepped and ready to go for the customers is definitely one of the levers that people can pull. And we see people who are more risk averse, and they'll say, I understand that, but I want to keep with this smaller team, or I want to keep a smaller pool footprint, and I'll grow slower. And I'm like, okay, we'll support you with that, but understand that in year 2 or year 3, you're going to have a different path than somebody who's
Hmm.
making different decisions today. Um, there's a lot in our world that can be done in terms of efficiency of how they're having, schedules for their customers, and kind of capacity at one time at a pool. um, we don't dictate the price that our franchisees can set at the pool, and so that's a huge one for us. And so
Hmm.
we give them training on how to do a competitive analysis of what other either British swim school locations or other competitors are teaching, and how we look at the math behind, if you can charge this much per lesson and there's 4 kids in a class, and this is what you're paying for your instructor and your rent, this is what will go to the bottom line. But that's a big one for our team.
Hmm.
And then
Yeah,
I think it's
huge.
probably just like any other business where you're controlling, you know, do you want to invest in additional, maybe some perks for your employees, because that will retain them longer, and then you're going to be spending less money trying to hire new people, so
Hmm.
looking at things that are straight costs of your business versus things that might be perceived as an investment. We try to help our franchisees with that as well.
So I have one final question for you, and then we're going to wrap up. And that is, what is one piece of advice that you would give someone listening to this show who is considering buying or investing in a franchise? Doesn't have to be a British swim school. It could be any franchise. Like, what is just one grounding piece of advice that you would give someone who's considering franchise ownership?
I would give them the advice to talk to people who are doing it.
Mhm.
People who are both happy with the experience and feel like it's been a great decision for them, and people who are dissatisfied and start to decide for themselves, what are some of the differences between those individuals, whether it's the brand that they're operating or if it's them as people, and start to see like, okay, what do I see of myself in these people? Because I think the best indicator of a franchise brand isn't necessarily people who are running it, but the people who at the top level, but the actual franchisees. And so it's such a big part of anyone's discovery process is what we call validation. And so I would just talk to as many people as they can who are doing it.
Yeah, that's really, really, really great advice because those are boots on the ground, right? Those are the
Mhm.
people that are in the trenches, they're doing the work. And I love that you said talk to people who love it and talk to people who are not so satisfied so that you can get perspectives from both and you can see the personalities and see where you are aligned. I think that's really, really wise advice, especially given, like you said, you're getting into a long-term relationship with a brand. It's not there is no 60-day exit clause when you
The
do things like
marriage.
this. Yeah, it's a marriage and it's a long-term one. So it's important to think about it. The other thing that I would encourage people who are listening to think about is, not all franchises are the same type of investment as a McDonald's. And there are also entrepreneurs out there that are sitting on money that don't know what to do with their money, that could literally be investing in a franchise that allows them the opportunity to have two businesses instead of one. And that can allow you to maximize your ROI as well. I don't know I don't know all the details about British Swim School, but I do know that some franchises require owner operators to be very involved, and other franchises don't require as much ownership involvement. And so, if you're running a business and you're looking for something to supplement your business, or you're just looking for a place to put some of the money that you've earned in your business because you want to grow it, I think franchising is a good place to consider. I know a client of mine, Andrea Bailey Brown, she owns several Jiffy Lube franchises,
Mhm.
and she also has a franchise consulting business. So she essentially acts like a broker to people who are looking to buy franchises. And I'm on her mailing list, and I'm always like super curious and interested in the different franchises that she profiles because sometimes she'll, send an email out and it's like, three franchises you could buy for under 50,000 or three
Mhm.
franchises you could operate as an absentee owner. And so she does some really unique things like that that I love reading and learning about because it just opens up your own creative pursuit for something new. And so I would encourage everyone listening to, not only take everything that Ashley has said into consideration here, but not to think about, is it a franchise or do I own my own business? But could it be an and not an either or?
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned the brokers. We work with a lot of brokers, and I think they're great because they're kind of a neutral third party
Yeah.
and they can help kind of decipher some of what people hear from the franchise brand. And they're typically, any good broker isn't going to recommend a brand that they don't believe is well run,
Hmm.
and that has, produced successful franchisees as
Hmm.
well.
Yeah, I know in the work that I've done with Andrea, one of the things that impresses me about how she helps people when it comes to acquiring a franchise is she really talks to them about how they show up. Because she's like, it's
Mhm.
not just about you picking the franchise. The
Mhm.
franchise has to also pick you. Like, there's a selection process. So
Right.
if you're serious about this, you need to demonstrate your seriousness because it's not you, you're not the final decision maker here. So I love that she's, super clear with people about how they should show up and how seriously they should take it. And she's developed a really interesting system to take people through on
Mhm.
that journey to, select the franchises that they want to work with. So, all that to say, I think that, when I was looking at a franchise, it was probably 25 years ago. And I
Mhm.
think a lot has changed in the franchise industry since that time. Technology has definitely changed and created more franchise opportunities. And I think that for people who are entrepreneurial, quite honestly, you'd be silly not to consider how a franchise could help you with your portfolio of companies if you're someone who is looking to build or if you're looking to do something new. So I really appreciate your time, Ashley. I appreciate everything that you shared with us. I think it was super valuable for our listeners. And yeah, thank you so much. It's been
Thank you for
great.
having me.
Yeah. So I will leave the link to British Swim School in the show notes. I'll also leave the link to Andrea's website in case you're interested in learning more about franchises in general. And I hope that this show has been, I hope that this show has stimulated some new creative ways of thinking about business for you, and that you are seeing the possibilities and potential of what exists out there from a franchise perspective. Because there's definitely some really cool things that you could do. And my experience with the owners of franchises in the British Swim School has been nothing but positive. So I hope this was valuable. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time on the next episode of She Talks Business.